Hey, I would like to welcome all of our returning members, any new members, and any guests who have come this evening to our September program meeting. Our presentation is called Mindfulness as Mensches, and as one of our resident Ashkenazi members, I should explain what Mensches is, but I will not steal Jesse's thunder. I'm sure part of his presentation is a little lesson in Yiddish. Jesse Rabinowitz is a licensed clinical psychologist. He's also someone, like they say in the Oscars, my dear friend, but I actually consider Jesse a friend. He was here when his son spoke to us for the first time back in 2019, and we spent a day together that was glorious. Besides putting up with me that day, he has been studying and practicing Gestalt therapy and mindfulness-based therapy for over 35 years, and he is a dim sum connoisseur. We had some delicious duck together that day in 2019. Like I said, he'll be talking to us a presentation called Mindfulness for Mensches. And after the program, you can learn more at mensch2.com, which he will be showing us during the presentation. And with that being said, I will turn you over to my friend, Jesse Rabinowitz.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you all being here. I want to just talk for just a couple of minutes, and then I want to go into something experiential because I don't really favor a lecture format. Basically, Mindfulness for Mensches is a project that I've been working on for a couple of years that got sparked when I had a kind of life-changing event. I got quite sick in 2020, not with COVID, but something fairly significant. And at the time, I received that experience in the way that I've come to learn to receive challenging experiences, which is, what am I trying to learn here? What am I going to learn from this experience? And so Mindfulness for Mensches kind of grew out of that whole thing and grew into a book, as well as this website that I'll show you just a little piece of tonight. I'm not going to say a whole lot more about it until we get into the experiential part and have some back and forth between us and put some meat on the bones. But I will say a word about the word Mensches for those of you that aren't familiar with it. The word Mensch comes from both German and from Yiddish, which are fairly close to each other as languages. The notion of Mensch or Menschlichkeit, or my term Menschitude, actually arises in Germany during the Age of Enlightenment, and it was connected to the idea of decency, compassion, sense of depth, and trustworthiness in others, or righteousness. You say a mensch, a person is a mensch, is a righteous person or a decent person. In a sense, I've expanded the use of that for Mindfulness for Mensches. My sense about the word is that it means like a whole person, a real human being, somebody with breadth and depth, somebody who goes beyond the superficial, and somebody who can be counted on in relationships to be not just reliable and righteous, but to be compassionate and empathetic, somebody you want around when you're going through tough times, somebody who's heart connected and open. So that's the way I'm using the term Mensch. And this whole notion of breadth and depth and wholeness ties in for me with the Gestalt therapy part of Mindfulness for Mensches. Mindfulness for Mensches being an integration, my integration of traditional mindfulness, which comes from the Buddhist traditions of meditation, and Gestalt therapy, which comes from psychological tradition, originally analytic tradition. So that's just a little, tiny taste about what this is about. But what I want to do is I want to ask you to go inside, and I want to take you through a guided experience, out of which I hope you will have observations that you might be willing to share, so that we can get into the material in a way that's organic, as opposed to me just going through lists and PowerPoint slides and cognitive stuff. Okay, so I'm going to ask people to be brave and to be willing to go inside, and then perhaps to be willing to share some of what you found when you were in there. Okay, so if you will, make yourselves comfortable and close your eyes. and just get used to being in the inner space. I want you now to begin to either remember a situation in which you felt a need to take action, to get something done, or to do something else to meet a strong need. I want you to pick a situation either in memory that was challenging or difficult rather than an easy situation. And if that's hard to do, reflect on whether there's something bubbling around inside you now of something that is not yet done, but which you're beginning to feel the stirrings of the need to do something about. Doesn't matter which you pick. It doesn't matter if you have perfect memory of the events leading up to a remembered situation, or whether you're simply going to start here and now with something you'd like to do and use your imagination about how that might go. I'm going to guide you through it, and I just want you to harvest what you notice from inside. So find the situation, and we're going to shift into present-centered time with this. So I'm going to be making suggestions about how you examine this in the now, in the present. So what I want you to do is I want you to begin at the beginning of knowing that you need to do this thing, whatever this is, or get this need met, or accomplish this. I want you to begin in the beginning when you first notice that this is something that's important or that you need to do, or that something is amiss and needs action of some kind. And I want you to notice, if you can bring yourself to that first moment, what tells you that there's a need? What tells you that something is stirring? What's the sand in the oyster? Is it bodily sensation? Is it something external that's happened? Is it thoughts or feelings? Just tune in first to how you know you needed to get this done, or that you need to get this done. See if it's something at the level of felt sense in your body, or if it's merely on the idea level. And as you contemplate that, kind of ask yourself, is this a feeling that you've noticed right away? Or did it take time to develop inside you? What brought it to your attention? Was the cue from inside or from outside? Did anything get in the way of you knowing that something is going on? Did anything prevent you or slow down your ability to realize, hey, something needs to happen here? So now let's imagine that you have begun to feel in some way the stirrings of this need, either through external or internal cues. And now I want you to consider how you interpret that. In other words, what's the story you're telling yourself about this need? I'm going to be quiet for just a moment and kind of run that through. How are you construing what it is you needed to do or feel the need to do? Does the story that you're telling yourself fit what you know about yourself? Or is there something challenging in here that challenges what you know about yourself? Even as you identify this need, is there anything getting in the way of understanding what it's all about? Or what it is you want? Or does it clash in some way with what you know about yourself? Does it raise any challenging thoughts or feelings simply to acknowledge the need to yourself? And now let's shift another step. So imagine now that you have gotten clearer about what it is you need, whether it's a task, whether it's a conversation to have with someone, whether it's some other project that stands there nudging you. How do you begin to get energy for this? Do you feel energy when you think about doing it? Do you feel it in your body? Do you have to think about it a lot and plan it, or is there already a sense of urgency pushing you? And as you begin to develop some energy moving you in this direction, is there anything that gets in the way of that energy? Do you get scared of what it might take? Do you feel perhaps you're being too ambitious? Or maybe do you shy away from the idea of really running with it and committing to it? Are there any thoughts or images that deflate your energy and that maybe cause you to back off and avoid the follow through? And if you are feeling energy for this task, notice how you feel it. Is it in your body or is it just in your head? Now we shift another step. Imagine now that you have committed to following through on this. How does it feel to take action? What does the quality of action feel like? Is it all in your head or do you feel it in your body? How do you feel as a mover in the world? Do you feel clumsy when you take action? Do you feel direct and determined? Does anything get in the way of moving into action? Are you perhaps feeling as if you can't do it well enough and that backs you off? Do you, as you begin to move into action, feel like you can go all out? Or is there anything that happens inside you that makes you want to hold back taking action? And now we shift to the next step. So you've taken action and now you are in the situation that you set out to approach. The need is strong for you to contact the situation, whether it's a doing, whether it's a discussion you need to have with somebody, an interaction you've been longing to have or avoiding having and need to have. But now you're finally confronting that task or that situation. As you play that out in your mind, what happens in the confrontation? Does it feel like you act on the situation or the other person? Or does the situation act on you? Do you find yourself trying to change something out there? Or are you also being changed by what's happening? Do you run the show? Or do you let others run the show? What goes into that decision? Do you try to scratch beneath the superficial surface when you make contact? Are you willing to go in deep into even your own vulnerabilities? Or do you just skate the surface or try to hang back from the contact? Is there anything about the contact itself that's either rich and delicious or difficult for you or hard for you? Do you wish the contact was more planful and structured, or do you enjoy the improvisation of what happens? So let's move now another step. Let's say that you've confronted the situation, you've had the interaction. How do you know when that contact is complete? How do you know when the need has been satisfied? Is it something you tell inside? Is it something that went on in the interaction? Do you know what satisfaction feels like for this? Does anything block feeling like you got what you needed to get? Do you find that you want to hang in and do more? Or do you feel like you can let go? Do you stop before you're fully satisfied? And if so, what makes you do that? Or even if you're satisfied, do you have trouble letting go of the interaction? Do you cling or hang on? And now one final step. You've had the interaction. In some way or other, it's got to be complete now, and you have to withdraw. How does it feel to let go and leave the situation? Are you still energized? Or are you moving into a restful state? How does it feel now to be out of the situation and on your own? If this was a situation involving others, what is it like to slip back into your own solitude? As you pull into your own self, do you immediately get taken up with the next thing to do? Or is there any contentment to be restful and alone? So before you come out of this, run yourself through the experience we've just been through and see which places there were either places where you got stuck or had particular challenges, any particular conflicts with any of the tasks that were involved in getting the need met, using your knowledge of yourself and how these pieces usually happen for you. Just kind of take note so that when we come back to sharing, maybe you could offer up observations that you had during the experience. And when you're ready, come on back and open your eyes and let's see. I'd like to invite people to share observations they had about any piece of that. If anything stirred things for you, or you noticed something about yourself, or any part of the cycle that we've just been through stand out for you. I want to invite people to share a little bit because I think it'll make understanding the steps in mindfulness for Mensches much richer if we have some real life fleshy stuff about it. So please feel free to raise hands.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Jesse, and hello, fellow Mensches. Gosh, that was like a week's worth of a retreat in 1 minute, Jesse. So,
Cool.
Moving to action, which is often reaction, and then thinking how much of this is ego-driven, and then struggling with the sense of, well, you're alive, so you've got to get in the fight, to is that always the best thing? So I really struggled with a lot of that at every step. Each step you took it further, it's like, no more, I can't go any more steps. But this was helpful in terms of just beginning to think, what do I need to do? What do I not need to do? So that was my struggle during this meditation.
So let me make sure I get it. You're saying that the stuck place for you was the question of take action or get hung up on the nail of, is this ego-driven and therefore something I shouldn't plunge into?
Yes.
Did I get that right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And by ego-driven, could you say what you mean?
Like, did I feel like this is something I need to do versus this is something that the situation is needing? And I think those are two separate things, because I know exactly what I need to do, but is that what the situation is needing? And yet I don't want to withdraw into a passive state of like, oh, forget it.
Right. So caught between that polarity of wanting to take action, but then questioning your motives and whether it's what the situation needs, but not wanting to fall into the other end of the polarity of passivity. And yeah, go ahead.
Oh, and I just had tons of experience fighting. That's what my modus operandi is, to go in and fight
To go in and fight
whatever injustice I see is
human.
on it, at least in my own mind, which is
Right,
could be just
right.
ego driven.
Right. So what enabled you when you would get caught in that, in this exercise? What enabled you to move ahead?
I think what it is it inserted additional questions in my mind, at least in the meditation, of like, okay, run it through these things. Is this what the world needs? Is this what I need? And if it's just what I need, then, you know, so that's what it put me in a conundrum, but it's a good conundrum because it makes me think at things at a different level. So that was helpful.
Right. So it's a helpful discernment for you that the greater good should carry more weight than I just need to tilt at this next windmill or something like that.
Exactly. Yes.
Cool. Thank you. Great. Bravo. Okay. Other observations or challenges people had doing this?
Hey, Jess.
Hi, Donna.
How you
Donna and
doing?
I grew up together. Okay. Good to see you.
Or something. Anyway, something that came up for me and that comes up frequently in my life when I want to take action is the difference between, see if I can explain this, the difference between not wanting to do something and not challenging yourself. So in other words, we live in a society where, you know, there's a lot of thought about, well, we should challenge ourselves. We should go outside our comfort zone. Okay. And sometimes that's not a good advice, because going outside your comfort zone is too scary and not something that you want to do. So my issue that came up, and that comes up often for me actually, or has in my life, I've gotten better at it, is knowing when this isn't good for me and I'm going to go exit, right? Or this is something I need to challenge myself to do. Even if it hurts, even if it's painful, or if I need to knock a door down. And I struggle a lot with that. And as I've gotten older, I've realized that that conversation I have with myself, I've started to be a little easier on myself. You know what I mean? Like I've said, well, if it doesn't feel right, then maybe it's just not right. I mean, if you don't want to push yourself to do something, maybe it's just not right for you. And instead of getting down on myself for not trying to do something that's difficult or that's challenging. So I'm constantly running into this, like, am I, it's not, am I good enough? It's, do I really want this enough to challenge myself? My example is I'm a singer, and I haven't sung in a long time. And I've realized over the last few years, and maybe, I do art instead. I do visual art. So I love it. I absolutely love it. And the music has taken a back seat. Lately, I've been practicing piano a little, but I've had this problem with music my whole life. I need to push myself. I need to push myself because I have this talent. I need to push myself. Everyone says I should do it, so I should do it. And it's just that I'm too scared. But I'm starting to realize maybe that's not the case. Maybe I just don't want it. Maybe it's just not my personality to be out there and present myself that way. I mean, I've done it. I was a singer for 30 years, but I'm saying it's not something I want now. So that's what came up.
So it sounds like the discernment polarity for you is what's a real need versus what's something I'm supposed to do or should do according to others. Oh, you have this gift, you should sing, or oh, you should be challenging yourself all the time, and really making the discernment of what's, what do I really need? Or what needs am I really going to get behind, I think is what you're saying. Am I getting that?
Yeah. Yeah. Or is it coming from me, or is it coming from somewhere else or someone else or some other societal thing that says if you've got a talent, you've got to use it.
Right. True needs versus shoulds. Yeah.
Right. But
Great.
I think age helps with that. I'm serious. Really helps to make you just realize I don't have time to make that I don't have time for that conflict anymore. I'm just going to do what I can do and I want to do. And I'll put myself within those things. But anything that doesn't feel right, I'm not going to push myself.
That the shoulds sort of slide away in importance as we get older and realize it ain't a dress rehearsal and it ain't going to go on forever.
I mean, you just have so many years left when you're in your 60s, and I just feel like, I want to I don't want to burden myself that way anymore.
Right.
But it is something that sits in my brain from my past.
Yeah. Great.
I don't think I'm the only one, though. This is something that I think a lot of people deal with is, do you push to challenge yourself, or do you just say, something that's not for me?
Right. And when you were doing, just one more question before, we take other folks, when you were doing the exercises, I was walking you through it, what helped you make that discernment in moving through those stages? What helped you kind of make those decisions?
I think what it came down to for me was how I felt. I started to listen to my intuition more and trust myself more. And it was a feeling of, this just doesn't feel right.
So you were tuning into your felt sense inside.
Doing what?
Tuning into your felt sense inside. When you say your intuition.
Yeah, but the intuition is what's helped me to realize that just because I used to do something, or other people say I should do it, or I used to say I should do it, that I need to do it now, but I don't. Right. And I think that comes with it's wanting to be good to yourself, not wanting to give yourself time, which I have my whole life, but I've been starting to get really better at that.
So it sounds like, in a sense, it's a movement towards greater autonomy as opposed to bowing to communal pressures, even in the form of internalized shoulds, right. But more of a sense of, no, this is going to be, this is my life. I mean, yeah. Great. Thanks, Donna. Okay. Other folks? Observations, experiences during that?
So this was very relevant for me right at this very moment. I have a situation with a dear person that I love as we're navigating taking care of my mom. And I put my big fat foot in my big fat mouth. Bad. Via sending a text to the wrong person.
Oh, nice.
Oh my God. So I need to have some serious communication with this person who I love, and I have to, I want to heal what I did and address it directly with complete humility and just really, I mean, self-admonishment, is that the right term? And it feels like it's all that, because I've had a situation with her. This is my sister-in-law. before, and when she's hurt, she is like rigid as a board and angry, and all I can do is just own my stuff. But so where I'm tripping up here, first of all, I'm anxious as I'll get out to have this conversation, because it's not going to be enjoyable or possibly not even productive. I don't know. But it's also because the underlying stuff that is based in some of my deep feelings that led to what I said, I feel like I can't even get to that because I've wounded her so much. And I'm feeling, when you were asking about like what gets in the way, well, what came to me was just all this mixed needs, the need to heal the situation, but the underlying need to address the bigger problems, the bigger issues. And I don't know how to navigate that. And because I really am going into this, before I was thinking all this through this meditation, that my whole goal is just to have complete empathy for her and what she's trying to do and what happened, because I really appreciate wholeheartedly what she's doing. It was just a misunderstanding, but rooted in some deeper stuff. So I feel a little bit stuck or uncertain about if I should even bring the bigger stuff there, if I should even speak to my own really, in my opinion, justified resentments and anxieties about the things that we're trying to do, or do I just heal the situation as is? And that's kind of what all came to me through this thought process.
So
I'm trying to think, do I just be a Mensch, or do I
Yeah.
take care of some things that I have some issues with?
Well, I'm not sure that being a mensch means not only one of those, honestly. But you're talking about competing needs, a competition between your more communally based self, which wants to be empathetic and heal whatever hurts have arisen, but also, the strong need to be honest and authentic about what has been going on for you in all of this, right?
Yeah.
And it sounds like the stuck place is both the fear of approaching a potentially contactful contact, we could say, and also the challenge of deliberating, should I do this, shouldn't I do this, should I only do this part, should I do this part, as opposed to, let me approach this and let's see what unfolds,
Right.
which would be, a different way to go. When you were doing the exercise, did you get somewhere with the challenges of that discernment? Did anything come through for you that was new or different or helpful?
It's really interesting. And my sister-in-law and I are very similar in a lot of ways, and we're very dissimilar in many ways as well. And so I want very much to be in the space of what happens and be able to flow with that or navigate that. And in that meditation, I could see how that could happen. I still am stuck with the question of I'm fighting against what I tend to do. I am a Taurus. I am a Jewish, pushy, broad, want things done the way I want them, and now, and why haven't they happened yet? And that's the problem. So I'm struggling with putting that part somewhere to get out of the way of the process of us being able to be there together. In that way, if I own that, which I will, clearly I'm talking to a bunch of people I don't know, and I'm telling you what a pain in the ass I am. So I will own all of that. And from there, I hope that we will get to that place of love and mutual understanding. It's just it's scary.
Yeah. So I want to pull out one thing from what you said because it bears a little bit on some of the material, which is you were aware of a strong part of your personality that can be dominant. And your feeling was, I need to balance that. I need to allow that not to be the only thing that's center stage, is my need or my dominance or my opinions or whatever it is. Yeah. And that's, I'm pulling, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, if I can lead with that, just as you're saying this and as I'm talking this out, and if I can lead with that, which is really what I was planning on doing, you know, because I need to start where she is. And she's there because of the way I acted in this situation. And I guess from there, I feel like that could very much open a bigger conversation. Maybe.
Yes.
I hope.
Right. Yeah. And I'm pulling out that part about the dominance, not to further
Okay.
deepen your sense of, oh shit, I'm a pain in the ass. But more that a lot of the work, as you'll see when we talk a little bit about mindfulness for Mensches and Gestalt therapy and the awareness cycle, is a lot of this has to do with learning about where we stand on certain polarities, what our tendencies are, whether it's I'm very dominant and so, you know, I lead with that, or whether it's sometimes I do way too much of what other people think I ought to be doing instead of, you know, going with my own gut about this, or the polarity that Jim was talking about. But a lot of the work in Gestalt therapy and in mindfulness for Menches is about learning our polarities and where we're off balance or where we'd like to have a different kind of balance. So thank you for that. And thank you for that honest stuff.
Thanks.
Sure. Other folks? Be brave. Jump in.
I got interested in what Donna was talking about and how that segued into autonomy. Because as I thought about it, she was talking about, you know, you get to a certain age and you, basically you stop beating yourself up to do what you should do. And I've always had the feeling that I've always sort of followed the line of least resistance anyway, and done whatever came to hand and procrastinated the things that I, you know, involved disagreeable contacts with other people or contacts that I expected to be disagreeable. And just sometimes I think, is this really the way to live? You know, when I say following the line of least resistance, I you know, it doesn't mean I don't do challenging things, but things that are not challenging to my personality. I run a couple of marathons. I've been a trial lawyer, which is not necessarily easy for me, but that just the social situations cast me that way, and so I did it. It fell. We had a big trial coming up at my firm about 20 years ago, and not something I particularly wanted to do, but it fell to me. I was the guy. You know, you're the guy who should be trying this, so go try it. So I did it. But you know, I haven't. It's hard to say that I've struggled to take myself out of myself, and I wonder if that's a good thing. Or a bad thing, or if it's really, I mean, there's no objective good and bad here in the sense of a worldwide good and bad. Is it is a smart thing for me to do as a person? Is that right? Is that a good way to live?
What would be different if you changed how you ordinarily have done things in this way? Can you say more about that more clearly? What would be different? What would you do differently?
That's hard to say. I'd be, like I say, it's hard to say. There are things that I put off almost indefinitely that I should be doing, that are part of my job, for example. And there are some days when I roll through them, and it's easy to come and say, why am I making a fuss about this? And I do it. And it leads to it produces a less stressful way of living, just kind of, I'm rolling through life. I'm doing it. Those are the things to do, so I do them. And sometimes it's just, oh God, I can't bear the thought. And, I don't know how to. I suppose that it's good to get to that place where everything is easy, so to speak. Where the things that you hate, it's like grasping the thistle. Grasping the thistle, you don't get hurt so much if you just grab it and do it. But often the prospect is unappetizing. It's a matter of overcoming your own. I can't even quantify or clearly explain these intangible feelings that I really don't want to do that. When it's not that big a deal.
But some of it does sound like it is a fear of the pain, of whatever the painful thing we dread is. Oh, if I do this, am I going to have a conversation that's going to be hard? Or is this going to be too arduous or something like that? That you're talking about, we respond to the painful anticipatory feeling and we avoid or we deflect. Instead of, as you say, accepting the fact of that pain along the way towards getting somewhere else. Am I getting that?
Well, if it's no more than the satisfaction of checking it off the list.
Sure. Yeah. Just getting things done as opposed to piling them up. Yeah. Or having them hanging over us like a sort of Damocles. Yeah. Good. Thanks, Dave. Okay, so maybe other people will join as we go along. I'm going to introduce a little bit of teaching material now around this whole mindfulness for Mensches stuff, so you can get an idea of the sort of backbone of what we just did in the exercise and what we're shooting for in this kind of work. So to do that, I'm just going to do a quick screen share so you can see the what we call the awareness cycle. Got that tab? All right. Okay, so this is typically called the Gestalt awareness curve, or the Gestalt need satisfaction curve, or the Gestalt awareness excitement contact curve, or whatever the hell you want to call it. It's called a bunch of different things. And as you can see, I've broken it down into about 7 steps, okay? So my little mindfulness for Mensches thing is a kind of 7-step program, if you will, to work on. And if you can follow along from the left part of that cycle, it begins with sensation. In the Gestalt model of need awareness and need satisfaction, we begin with the stirrings of whatever the need is, and we begin with sensation, whether it's inner sensation, our own experience of felt sense, or whether it's data coming to us from the outside that's kind of waking us up to something that needs to begin to happen. So the first step in the Gestalt awareness cycle is sensation, and has to do with our ability to tune in. And I'm going to break these down a little bit more in a couple of minutes, but I'm just going to run through these first for you. Sensation is the first part where I had you kind of listen in, like what's telling you that you need to get something done, what's happening. Is that a feeling in your body? Is it something from the outside? The next step in the cycle is called awareness. And what that means is when we begin to have the first stirrings of some sort of need occurring, how do we now tell a story about that? How do we sort of connect the dots, pull the pieces together of those, for example, if they're just bodily sensations and feelings, how do we pull that together into a story that begins to be about the theme of what the need is? So you could say in awareness, we begin to identify, well, what do I really need? And what does that have to do with me? And what does that have to do with the world? And what are the polarities, as we'll talk about in a minute, what are the polarities that get involved in being able to do that, to get a clear awareness of exactly what the problem is, and that begins to put us on the path to how to solve it, you could say, or how to resolve it. The next step in the cycle is called mobilization, and here's where I want you to notice that the cycle occurs in this curve. The x-axis of the curve, moving from left to right, is one thing, then the next thing, then the next thing in time, sensation, awareness, mobilization. The y-axis of the curve is energy building. And so we have sensations, we begin to have an awareness of a theme, you know, like Amy, we talk, it was, should I be angry about? Yeah, well, you should be angry. You know, now we're starting to build energy inside, because we need energy to get stuff done, especially difficult stuff. The organism is built to first feel a sense of need, and then to begin to develop and mobilize energy, so you have the get up and go to go out and get it. Okay, so that's mobilization. Then the next stage is action, when we finally get off our cans and begin to approach the situation. Finally, contact. We are in the situation, we're grappling with it, we're having whatever to and fro that comes with it. Presumably out of that comes some sort of sense of resolution, perhaps, that leads into the step called satiation, where we begin to feel like, I guess it was, as Amy said, you know, I start to feel less energy, like I've done the work I needed to do now. You know, I've grappled with this and I'm feeling less energized now. And finally, withdrawal, okay, where we now pull back, you could say, into our boundaried self, with much less of a sense of any pressing need, until the far right of the curve, until the next cycle begins, you could say. So that's kind of an organismic model from Gestalt therapy about how we get needs met. The idea in Gestalt therapy is to understand where we get stuck in the cycle and what those stucknesses are about. So in Gestalt therapy, the idea of, you could say, psychopathology or emotional difficulty is defined really as stuckness. What I mean by stuckness is, as we were talking about with different people's material, at any point in the cycle, there may be a polarity present where we are unbalanced, okay? I see myself as a nice person. I don't like to make other people unhappy. So here's this situation where I got to say something to somebody that I think is pretty well calculated to make them unhappy. I'm going to have a stuckness early on in the cycle because that clashes with my self-image. So I may get stuck, say, in awareness, because I'm thinking, wow, I'm not the kind of person that hurts people's feelings, but I got this thing to say that is going to hurt somebody's feelings. So that's a stuckness because I'm out of balance on that polarity. And in the work of Gestalt therapy and in mindfulness for Mensches, it's about discovering where we are at each stage of the cycle in terms of polarities where we may be stuck, where we may need to rebalance things a little bit. So when I was first writing this work and putting this together, I was going through this awful situation. I was having this health concern. I was I was in a hospital for 4 days. I'd never been in a hospital before, and it was right during COVID. I didn't have COVID, but I was stuck in this room, and everybody who came in was masked, and I couldn't have visitors, so I had an awful lot of time on my hands. And so I drew the Gestalt curve on a big piece of paper, and I was saying, okay, this situation that's befallen me, at each stage of this cycle, what maybe needs to be rebalanced here, you know? Does it have to do with my inability to be satiated, and so I eat way too much, you know? Does it have to do with my unwillingness to listen to my own sensations and trust my own intuition, and so on? So that's what we do in mindfulness for Mensches, is we look for the polarities that have to do with each stage and how to get each stage tasks done. And we use that as a jumping off place to work on ourselves, to work on balancing things out. Does that begin to make sense a little bit to people? I'm going to see a few people nod your heads. Any questions on that so far, or observations so far? Because I'm going to go in a minute and start going kind of one stage after another and talk about some polarities and stucknesses in those. But before I do, anything get stirred for people or you want to comment about?
Why is there a contact stage?
Mhm. Okay. In the model, need arises, and a need means we have to go out there and do something to get needs satisfied. The contact stage is where that happens, is where the need, for example, Amy says, I might need to talk to this person in my family. So the need is there. If she gets herself to that contact place, that's where that need is going to get satisfied, is in the to and fro of that confrontation. So that's why there's a contact phase. Contact is where if we're lucky, if we have identified clearly the need and we've built some energy towards it and we've managed to get ourselves to that place, contact is where the actual need hopefully gets satisfied in some way and unfolds. Did that answer your question?
It does.
Any other questions before I move on? Okay. So
what if the contact's not possible? How does the need get, if the contact isn't possible, how can the need get met? Because that is also the case sometimes.
So like interpersonally, if you can't have that talk, or the person's gone,
or the person says, I don't want to have that conversation.
Or the person says, I don't want to have that conversation. Yeah. Right. So then what we have to do is we have to do the work of what happens when the need is thwarted. And for example, one way is we do the work of expressing the need in fantasy, for example. Like sometimes therapists will say, write a letter you don't ever intend to send. Write it so that you feel yourself full out, expressing everything you want to express without any censorship. See how that felt when you did that. That's one way to do it. There are other ways. In Gestalt therapy, one of the famous techniques is the empty chair technique, okay? Where you put a chair in front of you and you talk to the person, and then you go over and you be that person and you talk back. Sometimes when we can't get the need met with the person, we have to confront our internalization of that person and have it out with them. That makes sense. That
perfectly. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's one way to go. Yeah. Other questions? Okay, so let's break down a little bit now some of these stages of the cycle and I'll talk a little bit about some of the polarities that I've identified that you'll find if you come to the website, or if you guys want a copy of my book, which I'm happy to send people, that I flesh out more. So let's start with sensation, the first part of that cycle. I'm not going to go back to sharing the cycle because I like to see faces. In the realm of sensation, organisms can be relatively numb, or they can be relatively highly sensitive, for example. One of the things that's been identified in psychology in the past 30 or 40 years is that some of us come into the world with highly sensitive nervous systems. And when those nervous systems meet certain environmental situations, it's going to play out differently than those of us that have a little more padding or perhaps a little more numbness. So that's one polarity in sensation that we might work on is if you realize that you miss your own inner sensations, like some people miss their hunger sensations, they don't even know they're hungry. Some people don't know they need to get something done because they're not listening into their body. They're tuned into what's happening out here in the world or what other people need, and they don't listen down deep into themselves. Or maybe they develop like psychophysiological stuff, and part of it's physical, but part of it is because there's some stress-related emotional thing going on that's making that happen. And they have to tune in a little bit and see, maybe a part of this is an emotional experience. So that's the numbness versus highly sensitive polarity. Another polarity in sensation is over-focusing on inner sensation versus over-focusing on outer sensation. I mean, we all know, and some of us are people who get awfully wrapped up with our own inner experience, but we're relatively blind to the nuances that come to us from outside. And sometimes that's brought to our attention. You're so wrapped up with your own pain, you're so wrapped up with your own emotionality, you don't see this person across from you looking sad, looking upset, who maybe needs something from you. Okay. Another one, and this might have a little bit to do with what Dave mentioned earlier about pain and avoidance of pain. There is a typical organismic tendency to want the feel goods and not the feel bads on the sensory level, especially those of us that live in the first world and have been socialized into the idea that maximizing our physical comfort is a higher good, and there's nothing wrong with the first world, and I love my physical comforts, but listening into our difficult sensations inside and letting those develop is also a part of living fully in the world and living richly in the world. And to do that, we have to learn to see our own sensations, especially the ones we avoid, the painful ones, to learn how to observe those. So a lot of meditative and awareness-based work is about just that. It's about learning, oh, let me pay attention to that pain I'm having. Let me pay attention to that agitation I'm having. Let me study it a little bit. Let me learn what it maybe has to tell me. So these are all ways of tuning up our ability to be sensate, to be fully sensate, richly sensate. And the theme that's going to run through all of this, you could say the highest good in Gestalt work and in mindfulness for Mensches certainly is what Fritz Perls called responsibility. Responsibility. The ability to respond to a multitude of experiences in a flexible way. In Gestalt therapy, psychopathology, as I said, is defined by stuckness, which also means a kind of stereotyped way of approaching the world. I'm pretty much the same here as I am here, as I am here, and I have very routine reactivity, and I kind of run on autopilot. In Gestalt work, what we're trying to do is expand our range. We're always looking for what end of the polarity I haven't visited, and what happens if I go there. What do I get? What do I learn? What am I able to do if I can stray to those parts of the polarities that I normally avoid? And that is the beginning of that well-roundedness, that menschitude, to me, of being able to find yourself in lots of situations and respond flexibly to your own needs and to the needs of those around you. So if we move then on to awareness, coming up from sensation, now awareness. So awareness is where we tie together these disparate sensations, little intuitions, little tiny wisps of something going on, and we begin to develop the story. We begin to develop the theme. What's this all about? And who am I in it? And who am I in the story of what it is I need to do? And so on. So this is the development of insight and awareness. It's kind of very much the territory of lots of traditional therapy, learning to do this, learning to go from knowing that something's going on inside you to being able to put it into words and flesh it out. So when people journal, this is often the therapeutic benefit of journaling, is you begin to write with sort of a vague idea of what's happening with you, and little by little the story kind of fleshes itself out and gets richer, and you understand what's at stake. Some of the stucknesses that face us in awareness are the stucknesses that face us whenever we're trying to develop difficult insight or new insight. So one polarity is honesty versus deflection or denial. Can we be plainly honest with our thoughts and our feelings about a situation we need to approach? Can we admit to ourselves, for example, unseemly feelings, unseemly thoughts, or things that don't fit with who we think we are, which leads to the next polarity, which is the polarity of persona versus shadow. And those are words that I'm borrowing from Jungian psychology. Our persona is the who we like to think we are. the mask that we put out to the world, you know, the things we're proud of about ourselves, the things that get us lots of goodies from other people. It's only a part of who we are. There is this other part of us, which Jung called the shadow, which is the parts of us or the parts of our potentialities that for one reason or another, we like to keep in the closet, okay? Either because we're not proud of them, or because we're not proud of them because we've been shamed for them, or because they are societally shamed, or in some other way they clash with what we are proud of about ourselves. So it's a lot about shame and pride when it comes to the awareness stage. So when it comes to shadow and persona, again, a very, very classic therapeutic territory. Let me start to admit those things about myself that seem foreign to me, that seem unusual to me, or difficult for me. One of the examples I use in the book is many years ago, in the early 90s, I was going through a very difficult divorce that was not of my own choosing. And I was kind of being savaged for a little while. And I thought of myself as this really sweet, gentle, good person, you know, a person of heart and love and so on. We used to, when we were in college, Amy, you would remember this, when we were in college, we used to throw the tarot cards sometimes when we were working on theater experiments. And so I like pulled out tarot cards. I'm going through this awful divorce. I pull out tarot cards and I'm pulling out cards looking for the hearts, because I always got hearts. I always thought, oh, I'm this guy with all his heart. And all I get, I'm pulling out cards and they're all swords. Swords are stuck in people's backs. Swords are hanging over people. Swords are stuck in the ground around dead bodies. Swords. Well, what the fuck was going on? I had a dream one night about Hannibal Lecter. And I went to my Gestalt therapist, Tom, and I said, Tom, Hannibal Lecter was in my dreams. And he said, like every great Gestalt therapist, he said, good, be Hannibal Lecter. And so I did a monologue. I'm Hannibal Lecter, and I could cut your tongue out without my heartbeat going up a certain, cool and icy. And I started getting into this characterization of myself that was completely unusual for me. But it turned out to be just what I needed. I didn't go out and kill my ex-wife or eat any of my patients. But what I realized was the time for my heart to be open was done for that moment, that I needed to negotiate a little more ruthlessly. I needed to be a little cooler. I needed to stop cherishing all those hearts and flowers that I thought about myself. So there's a shadow aspect that came in there. It happened to pop up in my dreams, and I cherish it to this day. It served me well in many situations, especially later situations with difficult people who were quite narcissistic and who I needed to know I could cut their hearts out if I needed to, because you don't bring empathy into a situation with a toxic narcissist. You bring the stiletto, So it's an example of kind of the work on polarities and awareness. I'm going to pause for a second. Any questions or comments before I go on into the next stage? Okay. So the next stage in that ladder, again, after sensation and awareness, is mobilization of energy. How we get juiced up, how we get the gumption to go out there and grab for the gusto and do what needs doing. Mobilization has to do, so sensation and awareness, you could say, are largely what we'd say were passive processes. They're about inner experience. Mobilization is where we begin to move towards action. And so, although the body is a subject of observation in sensation and awareness, in mobilization, the body's energy becomes even more prominent and figural. In mobilization, it's when we enter what Ken Wilber, who's a Buddhist philosopher and psychologist, would call the centauric stage, the centaur, the half horse, half human, where we get in touch with our bodily juice, okay? And where we move out of the inner passive and the inner cognitive, or you could say the afferent, the nerves that go to our mind and move into the musculature that needs to move outward into the world. So a lot of the polarities in mobilization have to do with things like, are you too much in your head? Or can you go into your body and feel your energy and feel needs in a strong enough way to give you the energy to go and do what you got to do? Or, so you've developed your idea of what you want to do you get stuck in planning about it? Do you get caught in eddy currents of self-doubt and questioning? The saying, the person with one wristwatch always knows what time it is. The person with 10 is never quite sure. So those of us that do that eddy current overthinking stuff will get stuck in mobilization, and it drains our energy out because we're going round in circles in these eddy currents instead of moving into action. Being over deliberate. Okay, lots of us, nice intellectuals like to deliberate about things way too much, and we're scared of being impulsive. We're scared of just taking action. So it's a polarity you have to kind of look at for yourself. A related polarity to that is what I call master of the universe versus scared rabbit. Some of us, either constitutionally or because of our experiences in breeding, think of ourselves, have introjected an idea of ourselves as a master of the universe, and we're more likely to take action and mobilize energy and tilt at every windmill, versus scared rabbits. Some people have, again, because of constitutional factors or because of environment, tend to shy away from action entirely because they don't feel the esteem needed to go out there and do what they need to do. So that's the polarity you might tilt with in mobilization. If we move into the action step of the awareness curve, a couple of different things come up. The first polarity that I identify in this is perfection versus good enough. I think about the introject of the maven. I don't know if you all know what a maven is. It's another Yiddish word. Maven is considered like a smart person or an expert, but it also has the pejorative connotation of a know-it-all. It is our inner perfectionism at work. The idea that the part of us that can appreciate quality goes way overboard, and everything has to be the best, and everything has to be just right, and everything has to line up perfectly. That sounds like a recipe for quality work, and it certainly is. Most of us have heard stories, especially in America, in a culture like America, heard stories about perfectionism, perfectionistic directors, perfectionistic writers, perfectionistic leaders. In fact, perfectionism has some real downsides. Primarily when it comes to action, the downside can be if we want things too perfect, we don't ever act, because we can always think of ways that it can go wrong, okay? We maybe arrive at a plan in the mobilization stage, but we just can't follow through on it because we're afraid of anything but perfection. We're afraid of anything but success. We have to look at the other end of the polarity and learning to cultivate good enoughness, acceptance, that a pretty good plan is good enough to move on, Another polarity or stuckness in the action phase is what's called a retroflexion in Gestalt therapy. A retroflexion is when energy is supposed to go out, and instead of we turn it in on ourselves, particularly aggressive energy. So the retroflexion here is inhibition versus aggression. Some of us like to move muscularly out into the world, and some of us like to recede. Some of that has to do with introversion, extroversion, which is a constitutional difference. And some of it just has to do with how we're raised or, other constitutional factors. But a lot of the work that we do in the action phase is still body-based, like in mobilization. So you might tune into, well, I really want to do this now, but I can feel in my body I'm holding back. I can feel I'm tightening my jaw instead of talking, or I'm flattening myself out instead of getting off my ass and going and doing this thing. So some of the work in inhibition and aggression or retroflexion is learning to find that forward-moving aggressive energy and move it out into the world a little bit more forcibly. Make sense? Finally, in action, another stuckness, and this relates to some of what we talked about earlier, is the interjections of nice versus tough. And this has to do with my story about Hannibal Lecter. Some people don't like to take action because a lot of action has to do with assertiveness, has to do with pushing forward. And they've learned that that wasn't a nice thing to do. I mean, I've been living in Richmond, Virginia since 1980 now. It was a culture shock when I came down here because there's an awful lot of indirectness in interaction down here. Whereas growing up in New York, this was not a problem. Inhibition or too much niceness was not a problem. If anything, I had to learn to dial back my own aggression, which was really out front when I came down here, and learn to find a softer part of me or a tenderer part of me so that my action wasn't always forceful or pushing or too hard or too dominant. Okay? Questions, comments? Been talking a long time here. Anything stirring for people? Okay, you make me talk more. All right, let's go on. Okay, so you've noticed your sensations of need. You've developed a story or a theme in awareness of what the need is, what you need to do. You've maybe developed the energy and a plan, and you've begun to move into action. And now you hit the contact phase. You're in the interaction, okay? This is where not only are you bringing with you all of that stuff that came before it, sensation, feeling, theme, need, but it's also where you're now in an interactive space that's going to be spontaneous. And that's not going to simply be driven necessarily by where you're coming from, but how the space is receiving you, whether it's your own inner space struggling with an inner conflict, or whether it's an experience or a conflict or a challenge out there. So contact is obviously a important, rich part of the curve. And there are a few different polarities that I've identified that I'll share with you. In every one of these stages, by the way, there are many polarities you can come up with. If we were working one-on-one or doing an ongoing piece of work, you might develop a sense that you were stuck somewhere, and we might develop the idea of a polarity that has nothing to do with the stuff I've shared with you, because there are all kinds of different polarities that can be at work. In contact, one of the things that comes through real clearly for me is dominance versus submission, okay? So we've talked early on when Donna was talking about what's my need versus the shoulds, or Jim was saying that one of his discernments is this just my need, or is there a larger need, or is there something for the good of others that is involved here? That's what's at work in dominance and submission. Dominance is like autonomy on steroids, okay? Dominance, if you think about, for example, narcissism, toxic narcissism, dominance or toxic narcissism is about filling up the whole space with yourself. So everybody else and everybody else's needs are way on the outskirts, and you have filled it all up. It's all about you. The other side of that, obviously, is submissiveness, where you have learned, or constitutionally maybe you're built for this, you've learned to shrink your own sense of your part in things and your own need, and it's all about allowing the other person. Obviously, in a good contactful situation, we want a balance of those, okay? If it's interpersonal contact, especially conflictual, it won't do for only one person to take the floor. You can't just have a sender, you gotta have a receiver. And then the receiver has to be the sender so that you can be the receiver and you can hear back their perspective. There has to be an active exchange, a rich exchange. So some of us have to learn, hey, we're built for dominance, and we have to learn to shut the fuck up a little bit and listen, be a little more receptive. When I was going through the divorce that I was talking about, we were in couples therapy, and I had figured out that dominance was an issue for me, you could say. I was with somebody who probably leaned towards the retentive a little bit. And so I came to couples therapy one day with buttons, buttons to pin on. And the button I pinned on her said, shut the fuck up and listen. And the button I pinned on myself was, please tell me what you're feeling. Because she needed to be encouraged to speak more loudly. I needed to be encouraged to shut the hell up and listen. Okay? So this is part of how we work out that. Another polarity in contact has to do with fusion versus distancing. So you could say, when you talk about good relationship, like a good interpersonal relationship, like a romantic relationship, is supposed to be like two people with a somewhat flexible rubber band around them so that they can do this sometimes and they can do this sometimes, right? Those two people have different needs for contact and connection, okay? Famously, introverts are a little less crazy about contact. Extroverts can't get enough of it. Okay, that's one way that this polarity sometimes splits. Harville Hendricks, who's a great couples therapist teacher, talks about fusers and distancers. So he talks about turtles and hailstorms. So you probably recognize this from your relationships. Turtle and the hailstorm. The hailstorm is the extrovert who rains down hail when they're talking. They're telling all their feelings and everything, and the turtle is slowly going into the shell farther. So the hailstorm hails harder, the turtle goes in farther. Okay, that's fusion and distancing. Or another version, when it comes to extroverts and introverts, is extroverts want to be in contact for a real long period of time. And especially emotional contact, emotionally charged stuff. They're still going at 11 o'clock at night or 12 o'clock at night. The introvert wants to go in a closet and go to sleep for 3 days because they don't need as much contact and they get tired from that amount of contact. So that's another kind of way that the fusion or distancing polarity operates in the contact step. Finally, in the contact step, and I sort of gave the nod to this early on talking about contact, goal-directed versus improvisatory. Some of us, especially if it's difficult, and we've done a lot of thinking about it, we want it to go a certain way. And we have control issues, perhaps, And so we want the interaction to be in a certain kind of control and go a certain way. And interactions are very spontaneous. So learning where I stand on that polarity, goal-directed versus improvisatory. Some people are really happy with improvisatory contact, and they love it if it goes up, down, sideways, and all around for as long as it takes. Other people want to talk about the issue and stick to the point and so on, and they have much less tolerance for that kind of thing. Obviously, we want to be flexible on that polarity because every interaction is going to need something different. No matter how goal-directed, how much you love your goals, the interaction may bring forth some kind of an unfolding that's new and fresh and different and you want to be a part of. By the same token, if it's too improvisatory, you may have to push a little bit for, no, let's stick to topic here a little bit because we're going everywhere and we're not resolving what we're doing. So, there's no one right place on any of these polarities and it needs to shift. What's important in the work is learning what our preferences are, what our leanings are, what our biases are, and learning to develop that range, that response ability. Okay? All right. Moving out of contact. Let's say the contact has happened. We've had the exchange. We've beaten the horse to death as much as we possibly can. And now our energy remember the curve begins to go down there, our energy begins to subside, presumably. Our sensations begin to dull. You know, it's kind of like when you're really hungry and you start to eat and it tastes so great. And then 3/4 of the way into the meal, it's not even that interesting anymore to you. You've begun to become satiated. You move into satiation. Some of us don't move there quickly enough. But moving into the satiation phase requires flexibility and awareness on some other polarities. So one polarity that I've identified is pleasure addiction versus pleasure denial. In our culture, we're very conflicted about the whole pleasure thing. On the one hand, we are a free and plural culture and a very entertainment-oriented culture and a very culture-oriented culture. And so on the one hand, we like our pleasures. On the other hand, we have a kind of Calvinistic, Puritan, not so pleasure-loving part of our culture. And we get conflicted about that. So when it comes to satiation, some of us are overcharged for pleasure, are overcharged for the satisfactions of contact, and we don't want to let go. And others of us let go way too soon and give up way too easily, or are kind of contactfully anorexic, you know? We satisfy ourselves with only a smidge of real satisfaction and leave the situation prematurely. So again, it's about figuring out who you are on that, and where you want to shift, where you want to challenge yourself. The other piece about satiation that has to do a little bit with what we were talking about in goal-directed versus improvisatory on action is sometimes it's not clear whether a situation has met your need fully or not. And a lot of times we go through situations where our needs aren't met fully. Probably much of the time, our needs are not perfectly met. The question is, are we going to get wrapped up in control and hang on to the situation after we've squeezed whatever juice we can get from it, or can we let go? So this has to do with control or letting go. Do we keep our teeth in that bone and keep chewing it? Or do we say, enough for now, even though I'm not perfectly resolved and I can let go? Which leads into the final step, which is withdrawal. Withdrawal challenges us for all of those reasons. Can I let go even if I'm not fully satisfied? Can I let go if I'm afraid I'll never be satisfied again, Like I don't like to leave food on the plate because I'm literally crazily afraid I'll never get to eat it again, My members of my family are smiling. My father was at a Chinese restaurant and the waiter came over and he said, "Are you done eating?" And he said, "How could we be done? There's still food on the table." So this was a part of the upbringing that led to somebody who has trouble with satiation and withdrawal. More specific to withdrawal is the polarities of solitude versus connection. And again, this goes somewhat to introverts and extroverts. Some of us are afraid of being alone, afraid of being in solitude, afraid of being with our own thoughts, feelings, in our own skin. Some of us are afraid of being in contact with others. And it really helps to know where you are with that and challenge ourselves. People like me who are super extroverted constitutionally, it's taken me 25, 30 years of mindfulness practice to learn to sit quietly by myself and shut the hell up, and just see what flows, or to sit in a conversation in solitude while contact is going on around me, So that's one polarity in withdrawal. Another polarity in withdrawal has to do with action versus rest. Especially in the American culture, action is highly encouraged. We're a can-do culture, America. And rest or peace or quiet is typically not boosted as much. I think that's probably changing as Eastern thought has come to America over 100 years now. More people are invested in things like quiet meditation, reflection, contemplation, and so on. But most of us are raised with a kind of an action-oriented ethic that says you need to be doing, you need to be accomplishing, you need to be making. And if you're sitting there quietly breathing, contemplating your navel, well, that's a waste of time and a waste of energy. Instead of realizing we need to go into withdrawal in order to incorporate what we've learned, incorporate what's happened, and kind of wait till other needs begin to arise. You have to be kind of empty before things can fill up again. You know, we need to rest. You know, anybody that's missed 3-4 nights of sleep knows rest is terribly important, because you start getting crazy, you feel shitty, and you start getting a little mentally crazy. And it's because the active rest and withdrawal is an active metabolic stage that's terribly important for us. And those of us that are a little overcharged, a little overactive, don't give ourselves enough of that space. So those are the basic steps in the cycle that we're talking about. Let me just see how we're doing. Okay, we're doing great. And the basic stucknesses and polarities. I want to open it up now, and I really do need people to jump in at this point, because I've kind of, for the moment, said about as much as I possibly can say. There's more in the website and more in the book, which again, I'm happy to send you if you'd like to read. But I'd like to open it up and see where people are at with this, or if people have comments or questions. Come out wherever you are. Somebody wrote in the in the chat, I'm practicing shutting the fuck up. All right, I respect that. Someone else, don't shut the fuck up. Is this all stuff that you all know already? Or is this challenging to you? Yes, Jim.
Either way is good. The polarities are interesting, because I found myself going back and forth between both polarities and understanding, yes, I've been this side, and yes, I've been the other side. And the conflict seems to be between the two. So what was it, the Master of the Universe and the Scared Rabbit? I can do Master of the Universe at one point, and 2 hours later, I'm like, holy shit, what did I just do? So it's that balance between the two, which is so important. And then how does one kind of draw that, kind of enter into that space of slowness and be neither necessarily reactive polarity, but rather exist within that space in a way that makes sense, in a way that I can actually do. So I hate to be so practical, but I do.
No.
What would be helpful to, to recognize both those things? I love your story too. Your story is just absolutely fabulous. But how do you recognize both those aspects and say, okay, let's give this a few minutes of reflection and thought, so then I can respond, recognizing that both those things are true?
Well, I mean, that's where a lot of classic mindfulness comes in, is I think Blaise Pascal said that the problems of humanity are all boiled down to people not being able to sit quietly in a room by themselves. So learning, and a lot of this is in the book and in the website, learning to watch our inner experience so that we can be more contemplative rather than impulsive, okay? When it comes to what you said about Master of the Universe versus Scared Rabbit, when you are in those situations where you're a little more prone to Master of the Universe, that would be a place to practice sometimes just sitting and paying attention inside. When I was working at JFS, at Jewish Family Services, we'd have these huge staff meetings, and I was always seemingly loaded for bear in these staff meetings. And I started practicing coming in and just being quiet and just breathing and watching my reactions to everything going on, but not acting on them. Because I simply wanted to learn, what's it like to do that? There are people that go through their whole lives just having reactions they don't act on. I'm not one of them, So it involved that kind of quiet inner reflection. When it comes to Scared Rabbit, when you, oh my God, what did I just do? in a sense, that's another time for mindful reflection of what am I scared of? Was it really unwise of me, or am I just scared of my own power, or scared of the spontaneous unfolding of consequences, something like that? I mean, all of this work comes back down to awareness. Both mindfulness and Gestalt therapy are both awareness-based therapies that have to do with expanding our ability to pay attention. Pay attention inward, pay attention outward, pay attention in here, pay attention in the body, and so on. It's all about opening awareness, opening experience. Did that answer your question, Jim?
Very helpful, and also thinking about that mindfulness and then it leading to action that is thoughtful, not inaction, which comes out of the scared rabbit like kind of stuff. So yeah, that's very helpful and very practical, and something I'll actually work on. And it's so like, oh yeah, of course, that makes perfect sense. But to develop it into a practice is the effort, and that's the hard part.
Yeah.
So thank you. It's helpful.
Sure. And again, for those of us that are constitutionally overactive, that breathing and paying attention inside is the basic thing, whether it's in formal meditation or whether it's just in a situation like this. I'm sitting here and I'm listening and I'm just breathing and I'm noticing what I'm feeling and thinking inside. Thank you for that. I guess we can begin to wrap this up. So I built a website called Menschitude.com. That's spelled MENSCHITUDE.com, Menschitude.com, and it's got a fair amount of the material we covered tonight. There is the book, which really was the point of the original project, was I just felt like getting out of my own way for a change and just writing a book. The book is unpublished. I have it in Microsoft Doc form, and I'm happy to send it to anybody who is interested in reading it. The book is both an explication of the stages, but it includes case histories from patients of mine, well disguised. It includes memoirs and some of the storytelling like I did this time, cartoons. I think it's an entertaining. The goal was to do mindfulness with people in that fleshy Gestalt way that feels very Western and fun, without the solemnity and asceticism and monasticism that characterizes so much mindfulness stuff, which is perfectly great, but also because the mindfulness tradition comes out of a monastic tradition, it sometimes feels like you're supposed to be in an ashram your whole life, and some of us really live in a juicy way in the world, and so mindfulness for Mensches was a way of trying to get some of the juice in there, get some of the flesh in there. So again, I'm happy to send that to you, and you can, let me think how you could reach out to me. You can reach out to me at I'll put it in the chat window. How do you do the chat window on this thing?
I think your website has a contact form as well.
It does.
Yeah, we put a link to the website in the chat, and so people can get to the contact there.
Oh, you did? Oh, far out.
We got
Okay.
you covered, Jesse.
And you could put my email address in there as well. Okay, put in JESSRAB113 And if you want a copy of the book, I'll send you a copy of the book. And if you like the book and you know any publishers, say, hey, this would be a really good addition to the canon. Okay. Any last words or comments before we wrap up tonight?
Just,
Yeah.
I'd love your pulling that Hebraic fleshiness, as it were, into the what can feel like an ashram, and that makes mindfulness all the more real. So thank you, Jesse.
You're welcome, Jim. I'm glad you like that. I certainly like doing it that way too, because we only go around once in this life. We want to have some fun. Okay. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Triangle Free Thought, for your free thinking and willingness to entertain this program. See ya.